This week on the podcast, we don't wish to scare you, but is it time to become recession ready, and what are the checks you need to have in place? Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6 and 7 figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host, Claire Hancott, is a finance director, chartered accountant and entrepreneur. And every week, I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow and grow your business. Hey, Claire.
Hi, Simon. That was a weird intro.
Hi. This week, I was at a conference and I learned something that I didn't know. Do you know what WD-40 stands for?
I do, actually, because one of my very good friends, Claire, is an accountant at WD-40, so I do know all about it.
Go on then.
Water disbursement 40?
No. It stands for water displacement batch 40.
Close.
And the reason for that is because it was the 40th version of the formula that they tried to create the product that was the one that was correct and they eventually moved forward with. And it was interesting because the reason that this became a thing is it was at a conference and they were talking about how all these different businesses within the same industry, you know, certain businesses are absolutely flying and certain businesses that don't, and they complain that the things that are making those other businesses fly won't work in their area or won't work with their type of clients or won't work with their type of staff and all this kind of thing. And the guy was pretty brutal, and I don't disagree with him at all, which is everything works everywhere. You've just not found the right iteration of it yet. And I thought that that was a very fair point, and he used WD-40 as a good example. Obviously, the other obvious one that you can use is James Dyson and his 5,000 attempts to create the bagless vacuum cleaner. But the point is that don't expect to get it right first time. Keep iterating, keep trying, try again. But the reality is that if somebody's making it work, that you're just not doing it right yet.
I think that's a really good point, actually, and something that I speak to several of my friends actually are wanting to start a business or in the early days of starting a business, and they're putting so much energy and time and effort into their very first idea. And you don't want to discourage them, but at the same time, having been, you know, a few years down the road from where they are now, you know that what you originally set out to do in your business is not what you end up doing. It might be broadly along the same lines. You know, I started out in accountancy, but what we started out doing is not what we're doing today. And yeah, I do wish that people would learn that quicker, particularly at the start, and just keep trying and keep changing and keep tweaking until you find something that really
tweak the model until you finally find it. I mean, you find it with everything. I always think the best case that this is an absolute fact is franchising, because in franchising everyone gets given the same model, but 20% of them are roaring successes, 60% of them have very average businesses, and 20% of them fail, but they all execute the same model. And it goes to show that it's all about the tweaks, the iterations and the execution that ultimately is why some succeed and some don't.
Yeah.
Interesting. Right, should we move on to this week's news story of the week?
I don't know, do we want to? I think this is possibly one of the most depressing podcasts we've ever done, I think.
Nah, it's fine. Couple of stories. To be honest, it's been covered quite a bit, but in the first headline was UK jobs payroll numbers show the biggest fall since COVID, and the other story that I picked up on was jobs market is flashing a warning sign to Rachel Reeves, and both of them are the same sort of story. Basically, just to give you the facts, I think it was the month of May saw the biggest decline in the total number of payroll employees in the UK. It fell by 109,000 people, and so far since Rachel Reeves' budget in October, she's managed to rack up a payroll decrease of 274,000 people.
Wow.
since her budget in October, and since she put £25 billion rise on to employers. I mean, no shit, Sherlock. Do you know what I mean? I'm sorry to state the obvious. It's not really surprising that you can't put £25 billion worth of cost into business and them not, you know, need to freeze recruitment, lay people off, various other things. And I think, you know, we talked about this, didn't we? We talked about this back in October because we did a lot of podcasts about being really proactive to this, the things you can do ahead of those April changes coming in. But I think, and we'll come back to this in the deep dive today, I think what you do see, especially in larger corporates, is they're a bit slower to react, aren't they? And often, until they see the pinch in their numbers, they don't react with the changes in their business. And I think we're probably seeing more of that now, later after that April changes, the businesses are starting to sort of make those changes in their payroll employees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to put it in perspective, there's roughly normally the number floats sort of 30 to 35 million people in the UK that are working. So around 300,000 is 1%. Is the drop.
Yeah.
But what you will see in big businesses is they won't necessarily lay people off. And that's the stuff that tends to hit the headlines, is when large swathes of people get laid off. Because particularly if you're in a big corporation, there's very specific rules about what you can do around redundancies and things like that. So that does tend to be, particularly like when you look at like the unionised industries and stuff, it hits headline news. What you will see instead is you'll just see this gentle creep of non-replaced heads, or what we call a headcount freeze, where when somebody leaves, they don't get replaced, and they just call it natural attrition. And that is what is not hitting the headlines, but I
would imagine
bottom
is
dollar
the biggest part of that. Yeah,
that the biggest part of that is through this, what they call natural attrition rate. And it's at a time as well when we know that businesses are pushing for AI, and it's not become mainstream. It is still a small number of businesses that are finding ways to incorporate AI that's delivering efficiencies that mean people are losing jobs, but it's without a doubt happening. And I don't necessarily think that long term AI will have an impact on the total people employed. I don't believe that. But it will definitely have a shorter term impact, because people with these manual administration based jobs will lose their jobs, and then we'll start to see this big black hole in the more senior or more specialist like programming developer roles. But eventually people will just become more skilled in that, and that will become far more mainstream in terms of the jobs market.
Yeah, I mean, your numbers are spot on. The total number of payroll employees is about 30 million. So we're talking about a 1% drop since October. So not like...
It's not groundbreaking, but it's a lot.
Say not groundbreaking, but 1% is 1%, isn't it? I mean, in an economy where we're trying to grow it 1 to 1.5% a year, which is a terrible number as it is, to lose 1% of your payroll employees is, it's not great.
What's not clear is what happens to that 1%. Does that 1% now become job seekers on job seekers allowance or welfare? Or are they people that are retiring? Are they people that are, the gig economy, and maybe they've got self-employed jobs like Uber drivers, that type of thing? Or are they just, people that are just falling through the cracks in society, living off their parents or stealing from shops, whatever it is? You just never know.
Yeah, I mean, it does tie in with the fact that there's a load of ONS data here as well that say that the total number of advertised vacancies has slipped by 63,000 over the quarter as well. So what you said about natural attrition seems to be playing forward in those numbers as well. But I think we'll move on to this in a bit. But I think just generally, you said to me the other day that you're hearing from more of your clients that things are a little tougher, and work that perhaps would have been coming their way at this sort of time seasonally seems to be a bit tougher and not coming as easy. You're getting that anecdotal feedback. I spoke a couple of podcasts ago about some anecdotal feedback I've got about the amount of sales we've had fall through people losing their jobs, which is more than we've seen in a long time. So there's definitely mood music around that doesn't sound great. I mean, none of it should be a surprise, but I guess the government are going to turn around and be quite surprised by it. I don't know why, and I don't know how they expect to get this go for growth strategy that they've gone for when it's not surprising. You put 25 billion in, it's going to result in less employees, isn't it? It just is.
It's very difficult, because certainly just after the election, we were and ahhing, and I think a lot of not the mainstream economists that work for like big banks and media organisations and things like that, but the likes of like some economists that have YouTube channels and things, and they were generally sitting on one side of the fence. It was either that we're actually going to enter a boom now. There's so much pent up money in the UK that we are just going to have a boom regardless of what the government does. Or we're going to enter a recession. And I think you were erring on the side of actually we were going to have a boom. That's generally what you're...
And I think that pent-up money's still there. I think the problem is...
we were in TK Maxx this morning, weren't we, picking up a suitcase? And my God, that queue was insane. And everybody's just buying like candles and bloody soap and things like that. There is no
weekend. It's not very indicative
in our economy.
That's not very indicative, because we were just saying last weekend that we went out and you get a table in a restaurant everywhere. It's like, so it's really difficult to take little granular things and say they're particularly indicative, but the data does suggest, obviously, where we're at with that. And I guess that will just tie into potentially your squeeze on interest rates in the second half of the year. So I think jury's out on this and we'll see what happens. But it does move us on very nicely to the core of our subject to this week's podcast, which is being recession ready if it does come. So let's chat about that in a bit more detail. So Claire, recession ready, these are the checks that every business should be doing now. Talk to me.
Yeah, so we are talking to our clients now about understanding what we call their margin of safety. And I think this is really important for any business to understand what this is, but particularly at the moment, I think you really need to understand what your margin of safety is and have that number in your head. So what your margin of safety is how much your sales can drop by before you start to feel pain. So whether that's profit pain or cash flow pain, more importantly.
Yeah.
So, every month, if you're doing like 200,000 of sales, for example, how much can that drop by before that causes you a problem? Okay. That's what we need to know. And it's not just profit, it is cash flow as well. It's important to track too. So that's your margin of safety. And it just means that you've got a number in your head. You know exactly what your sales number needs to be. And if it's not hitting that number, then you need to start taking action. What we don't want to do is not have these numbers clear in our mind and not be aware of the trigger points that we need to be taking action upon.
Yeah, and I'm guessing these numbers can be actually really quite slight because, it's the average business in the UK probably runs a 10% profit margin, so you lose 10% off your top line, you'll break even, yeah? If you can't cut costs.
Not always. And so in a service-based business, for example, like our businesses where we don't really have cost of sales, then it's much easier.
True, yeah, because you don't have a manufacturing cost.
Exactly, but where you've got a cost of sale, then actually it's not quite that clear cut because obviously it's take a manufacturing plant, if you're not producing goods, well, you don't have to pay for those goods. So that margin of safety isn't always equal to your profit.
Possibly. I guess there's still such a lot of cost to the manufacturing plant itself and the machines and everything else and the people that actually probably 90% of the cost remains irrespective anyway.
Yeah, in a lot of circumstances, So cool. We really need to understand now what our margin of safety is so that when you have these what we would call trigger points, when trigger point 1 happens, we want a plan that says these are the things we implement. Okay. When we get to trigger point 2, we implement these things. So it's about being prepared because when you're in pain from a cash flow or profit perspective, you're probably going to find it a bit more difficult to think clearly, make sound decisions, things like that. So you want your plan mapped out now. And also you want your team on board with this, maybe not the whole business, but certainly more senior team. This isn't about doom and gloom. This is good business continuity planning. Like what would happen if? Well, what would happen if this is what we need to do?
Yeah.
And when you go through this process of planning in advance, you might realise, well, actually, if we want to execute this, we need this information, which we don't have available at the moment.
Yeah.
So what you don't want to do is get to the point where you're in pain and then you're like, bugger, we actually can't implement quickly and easily what we need to do to fix this. And now we're in a bigger mess.
And this is what some businesses will have done very well ahead of the stuff coming in April with employers, national insurance and minimum wage. And some businesses won't have done as well. And the ones that won't have done as well are the ones that are going bang right now that are really struggling. I guess there's this middle ground, which we're probably seeing with the big corporations where actually they probably did do the plan and they have these different trigger points that they're probably hitting now. They're going, if we put prices up and that doesn't stick and numbers hit this in May, this is what happens. We freeze recruitment or we lay off people or whatever, and they'll have those various triggers which we're seeing probably being implemented at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, what's trigger 1 then?
Okay, so step 1 is understand what your margin of safety is.
Yeah.
Step 2 is around making a decision about your cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very personal decision based off each business owner. There is no right or wrong answer for this. But you need to make a decision how much cash you want to keep in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as. I have heard several stories, and actually I attend Dan Bradbury's CEO Mastermind Days, and they had a guest on and he was speaking about something that he'd been through, and he had been through an absolutely hideous time, had mental health problems and then lost his wife as well. And through that, it meant that because he had cash reserves, he was able to take the time he needed from his business. So we've done podcasts where we say the ideal bank balance is 0, but that's in like a hypothetical world that doesn't exist in reality. So what we need to think about is how much money are you comfortable keeping in your bank, and time like this where we've got this potential unknown cliff edge that we could be about to fall off,
do you adjust your usual
risk tolerance? Yeah.
I think this is interesting because it's so difficult. You can give people a logical, answer as to what the best amount of money to leave and what the best amount of money not to leave in your account is and various other things. But ultimately, it's a bit like, it's almost like pension advice, isn't it? Like so many things come into it, especially your age, how long the business has been going. Is the business in growth and startup phase? Is the business in maintenance mode? Where is it? And I think that just makes such a big difference. And we've seen this as we've grown our businesses. We've seen this I especially can relate to this in growing a property portfolio because, at the early stages, you just want to leverage really high, sweat every asset because you're trying to grow fast to get to a certain peak point. And then you want to, bring that LTV down and just have some margin of safety, as you call it, like a bigger margin of safety, because actually the reality is that the more you have and the more you build, the more you have to lose. And that's the biggest factor, isn't it?
And I was in a board meeting last week with a business, and they're a family-owned business, and we were talking about supplier payment terms. And I was talking to them about this trigger point plan and categorising suppliers and things like that. And they said, well, we don't want to pay suppliers any quicker. We're quite happy that we are very well known in our industry for paying on time or early.
Yeah.
They said because that means that, we're quite a small company and we need people to do us favours and things like that. And that happens a lot. And that's what makes our business good. And I said, look, this isn't about thinking about what we're going to do in good times when you've got the luxury of paying people early. This is about understanding where those trigger points are. So if you don't always have that cash in the bank, what do you do? What are the steps that you take? And at the moment, they don't know what those steps are. So if that happened, and this might not just be that there's an economic downturn, they were talking about making a long-term investment potentially in commercial property, which would eat up their cash flow. And it's like, okay, so you are going to move into a period where cash isn't so readily available to you. How do you manage that? And what you don't want to do is move into that period without a plan.
Yeah. And, it is planning for... we've used some data points this morning in the news story and is planning for hypothetical things that may or may not play out. I get that. We may be totally wrong. We may find in a few months' time that a big boom happens in the economy and something completely changes. It's just the indicators don't seem to suggest that now. The indicators suggest that we're going to be either okay and flat or we're going into a troublesome time. So it is, you can always pivot this really quickly, can't you, if you need to?
And regardless of whether we enter an economic downturn and whether your business struggles or not, these are just basic numbers that are actually valuable for you and your team to know. Your margin of safety, that's essentially your break even. How much sales do you need to do every month to cover your costs? That should be something that your sales team know 100% on a monthly basis anyway. And when we're talking about cash flow, this is about making sure that you are consciously making decisions about your cash flow, rather than what I actually see with a lot of businesses doing is that cash just flows out. People say, can you pay me? And they just pay money out and cash just goes. Whereas what we're talking about is moving to a more structured approach where absolutely you can decide to pay people early. That's not a problem at all, but it's a decision.
Yeah.
It's not something that's accidentally happening in the background without people being consciously aware of the impact of it.
You can also see how this whole thing can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, can't you? Because, just as we're talking here, my brain's whirling round and I'm thinking, right, okay, so you get these early indications of some numbers that don't look great. The government have taken some actions that you sort of kind of know A equals B. It can't equal C. It just doesn't work up. Then people like me and you, other podcasters, business coaches, people out there go out to businesses and say, start to
hoard cash,
don't invest, don't put that stuff. Consumers sit there scared at home and they keep their bank balances full of savings and cash for their own personal thing. And you see how actually we need, actually we're more likely to go into this because we're all preparing for it. And, that is not where an economic boom comes from. It's when people feel really safe that they can have their bank balance at near zero.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like we're anywhere near that place, and this is not helping the situation that these things compound, don't they? So it'll be interesting and see where it goes.
So let's have a little recap and say, so number one, understand your margin of safety. But
forecasting.
Then what are you going to do? You're going to put three things in place. So firstly, you're going to look at your customer base. So if you're a business that offers payment terms to your customers, you absolutely need to have some sort of risk profiling on your customers. Okay. So even if it's just three categories of which customers do we think are are most at risk of themselves having cash flow issues in this economic downturn, because they're the ones that you want to be regularly staying in touch with. The minute they've got an overdue invoice or something like that, that's a red flag.
You've just made me think, like, here we are worrying about us, but actually we should, the real proactive businesses are worrying about everyone else as well.
Yeah. So particularly, the construction industry, it's not...
took everyone down.
That is like a supply chain nightmare, because the person at the top goes and it just... cascades down, and it's like a domino effect. So it's that type of thing. Is look at your customers and just separate them into 3 categories. If you've got some really big blue chip organizations, they're probably going to be less risky. If you've got some family run businesses that maybe don't have cash reserves, or new businesses, that type of thing, they're probably going to be in your higher risk category.
Yeah.
So you want to be separating your customers and making sure that you're really on top of that bad debt risk, because one bad debt can take a business down. So that's what I would be doing for your customers, really making sure you're staying in touch with them.
Okay. Priority 2?
Number 2 is your suppliers. Okay. So what you want to do with your suppliers is, I think it's twofold as well. If you've got any suppliers that are critical to you, so somebody that might deliver a product or service that's very difficult to source elsewhere, or anything like that, that's, again, you need to be aware of what your high risk supply chain issues could be if one of your customers went under.
Yeah.
But more importantly, we want to be categorizing our suppliers into 3 categories. Now, I recommend this just from a cash flow perspective and an operational financial control element, is to separate your suppliers into 3 categories. You've got your direct debits. You've got your prompt customers. These are the people that prompt suppliers. These are the people that we absolutely must pay on time, either because it's critical supply or just they will not allow us to extend payment terms, that type of thing. Yeah. And then you've got your month-end suppliers.
Or I guess there's a suppliers that are incredibly aggressive and they cut you off really quickly as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then what you've got there is you've almost put those into like 3 different priorities of, your direct debits. These are things that are easy to, just change the date of a direct debit by a couple of days and push out payment terms, things like that. You've got your month-end suppliers. If you're paying them on the last day of the month, then just, delay payment a couple of days. It's that type of thing that can make all the difference when we're talking about putting an extra few £1,000s into the bank. If you are feeling pain, can make all the difference. So make sure that you've got your suppliers categorized and that you know which suppliers you can pull a lever with if you need to.
Okay, cool.
Okay. And then the final thing that you need to do is you need to categorize all of your costs. So into P1, P2, P3. So P1 are going to be your absolute priority. Probably a lot of your staff are going to be in your P1 area. Hopefully all of your staff are going to be in there. If they're not, then you need to be questioning why you're paying people that are not a high priority in your business. But P1 is absolutely, this is last resort.
It does put like it's talking about the news story and layoffs and not recruiting. It does put a real focus on it. When you put it like that and you go, actually, priority 1, cash out is our people. Like, it does make you then probably really analyse and go, are those people, is every single one of them really delivering that amount of value that I expect from the business? Are they really worth that, my priority amount of money over the supplier, over the rest of the business? And it probably does give you can see why when things get tight, people lose jobs because they become under the microscope, don't they? And when that's the thinking that goes through a business owner's head, especially small business owner. So
you've got your P1, which is, absolute last resort. You've got your P2, and then you've got your P3. And if you find yourself in financial difficulty, it's going to be your P3 that you start with. You start with your P3 and you say, right, we just simply need to cut. This is what needs to go because it doesn't strategically affect our long-term business. And thinking about, we could literally sit here for hours and talk about different ways to do this, but people in particular, but any product or service you've got, it's like, how do you quantify the value that that's delivering to your business?
Where would you put marketing spend in this?
It's really interesting, isn't it?
I love this question.
Marketing is incredibly...
Marketing's one of the first things you cut?
Marketing is incredibly difficult often to track return on investment. Like, there's all these fancy metrics like ROAS and things like that. But the reality is bullshit. Trying to track return on marketing, unless you have like an e-commerce business where it's, somebody literally clicks on a link and goes through to the checkout, you're going to find marketing incredibly difficult to quantify. But generally, I would say that your data should be telling you. So, for example, you do leafleting, don't you? We have QR codes on the leaflets. They never get used. Nobody ever says, I got a leaflet through the door, so I booked a meeting. But what we do know is there's a direct correlation between consistent leafleting and leads.
What we do know is that there was a time when we didn't do leafleting, and then there was a time when we did do leafleting. And what we did do, and we hard coded and kept that data, is we analysed the growth in that postcode area between not doing leafleting and doing leafleting over a 2-year period, and watched the growth over 50% grow. And the only thing we did differently was leaflet, and it was by postcode specific. So there were some postcodes we didn't do leaflet that didn't see that uplift, and some that we did that did see it. That, while you can't get it at a granular level, is enough data to tell me that that's a very powerful marketing channel, that if I switch it off, I could roll back that 50%. So, you do need to know these things. I mean, there's a big thing to say in marketing that nothing happens if you stop marketing, nothing happens.
What you are going to do from a marketing perspective, though, is you're going to err on the side of caution of those things that you do have a high level of confidence are delivering returns. You're not going to be trialing new things and doing the experimental stuff and, this is a nice to have. It's that kind of stuff that's going to go. That's, tinkering around the edges and maybe delivering an additional few percent, but not moving the dial.
The annoying thing, though, is that the most expensive things are the legacy things that work, like leafleting. Like, it'd be like 50% of what we spend is on the thing that is, because it's the thing that's really expensive to do, but it's absolute backbone stuff. And so it's quite difficult, because the tinkering stuff is usually cheap.
But look, what you've got to remember as well is that the first thing the first thing that business owners that are not as business savvy will do is cut marketing.
So the best thing you can do is keep your marketing going, because you're like, this is what I've always been told in marketing, is that this is why I went down this rabbit hole with it, because I'm a big contrarian believer that when downturns happen and I watch everyone else switch their marketing off, ours just continues irrespective. Now, the problem is with that is that you've got to hold your own, because actually if the market's not there, you don't get the response you get. What you do get is this incredible response when the market comes back, because you've been in their zeitgeist for the last 12 months, whereas everybody else has disappeared and you're the first to mind. So it's very, very powerful from that perspective. So, yeah. And like I say, the power of that marketing, when all the other noises and that was dilution has disappeared out of the market, is incredible. So it's a difficult decision, really difficult decision, because it's easy to go for and go, take that out.
Yeah. And this can be quite an emotive thing to do when you're looking at your business and you're saying this is a priority 3, it's the lowest level and the first thing that we get rid of. What we're not saying is that stuff isn't important in your business. What we're saying is that when cash flow is tight and it's the difference between survival or not. There needs to be a decision-making matrix, a way that you make a decision. And so therefore, particularly when you're involving team members in this, the wider business, for example, it's going to be really, really important that you are positioning this in the right way, because you do run the risk of people feeling like they're working on things that are pointless. And we're not saying that. We're just simply saying this is the plan. If the business ever gets in trouble, this is lever 1 we pull, this is lever 2, this is lever 3, and then it's Armageddon. Yeah. You don't have another option after that.
Great. That's everything.
I think so.
I think that's probably enough, isn't it?
I do.
To be getting on with.
Let's move on then.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
I tried to take over your little bit there, didn't I? And you weren't having any of it.
Have it. Go away. No, don't go away. I didn't go away. No, I mean, away you go. Away
I go. What is this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra, Simon?
So I thought this week that it's a bit of a heavy podcast and it's a little bit negative. So I wanted to finish it off with something really positive. And that is the new season of Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix. Somebody Feed Phil. Oh, it's one of my favourite programmes. So I was speaking to somebody the other day who hadn't heard of this and didn't know about it. And I just nearly freaked out. But so if you've not seen it, it's now on season 7. I don't know what you've been doing. Have to watch it. I just absolutely love it. It's actually probably, I dare say it's probably getting a bit worse, but it was good from season 1, to just watch from season 1 onwards. And basically it's like a hash up of, I think it's like Idiot Abroad versus Rick Stein versus like
Man Eat Food,
Man versus
Man
Food.
Versus
like
food,
it's like travel come food come everything thing. So it's got,
street food, high-end food, Michelin-star restaurants,
touristy bits, all the rest of it, and a funny guy going around
a different destination every time, and does everything from street food.
One of
to
my
the
favourite little chill out kind of seasons and series that's quite light watching. So that's Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix. And thanks for joining us for another week's podcast. As always, if you feel like you might have outgrown your current accountant, you'd like to work with Claire and the team at Profit Cash Growth, nip over to the website profitcashgrowth.com, where you can book a discovery call. You can also order a free copy of Claire's book, Profit by Numbers, and do listen back to all the podcasts. They are all evergreen, lots and lots of educational content for you. And please just share this with another friend that owns a business, and we'll see you again next week.